though not but pleasing to others, owing to my poor intelligence and lack of learning. I've relied on the sutras and the words of the excellent, so I think these bodhisattva practices are without error. However, as the great deeds of bodhisattvas are hard to fathom for one of my poor intelligence, I beg the excellent to forgive all faults, such as contradictions, non sequiturs. Through the virtue from this, may all living beings gain the ultimate, conventional, altruistic intention, and thereby become like the protector Chenrezig, who dwells in neither extreme, not in the world nor in peace. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, going through this morning, I'm just struck at the richness of the teachings come at you from so many different ways. So this little booklet was composed by one of those Kadampa monks, and anyone who doesn't have one, please feel free to take one as White Lotus's gift to you. This little text is considered to be like the crystallization of what the Dalai Lama says is his favorite book, Entering the Bodhisattva Path, by the Indian monk Shantideva, back from the 600s, 700s it was composed. And it's a very beautiful prayer, poem really, and it gets into all sorts of things, and really, really beneficial to read. But this is like the crystallization of it. So Gartner Rinpoche has handed out, I'm sure, more than 10,000 of these. He's had it translated into Estonian, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, German, Russian, Ukrainian. He hands out these little books wherever he goes. And of course, he gave one to White Lotus. But it's wonderful because it has, one, he says the entire Buddhist path is contained in this book. I mean, it has an outer meaning, an inner meaning, a secret meaning, an innermost secret meaning. It's the nature of, the Buddhist view is beyond concepts, vast. And yet the great compassion is that the teachings have this full range, going from beings who are practically completely deluded to beings who are just a very, thin veil away from full enlightenment. And there are stages of enlightenment. So it's very skillful because in one sense, all of these teachings, whether they're conventional or extraordinary, they're all the truth because it's as we can see. It's said that when it says if someone goes to the ocean and wants water, and if you come with a thimble, you'll get a thimbleful of ocean. If you come with a cup, you get a cupful. If you come with a tanker, you can fill that up. Or you can sort of jump into the ocean and become the ocean. I mean, there's no limit. And yet we live in a situation where there seem to be limitations. And so how do we skillfully deal with that? And that's what the Buddhist teachings are. The Buddha said, my teachings are a finger pointing at the moon. And don't confuse the finger with the moon. It's provisional. In one of his earliest teachings, he said to his monks, well, suppose a man comes to a river and it's like in flood, and so the bridge has been washed away, but he spends some time and he builds a raft out of different woods and things that can float, and he uses the raft to cross the river, so it's the river of suffering. But what do you think, monks? Is it wise for the man when he gets to the other side of the river to take that raft on his head and carry it around with him wherever he goes? And they said, no. So he says, so are my teachings. They're a raft to get you over the river of suffering, but you don't need to be carrying them around, per se, once that is accomplished. So it has that wonderful attitude of that. And, there's so much suffering in human history of people fighting over the finger pointing at the moon. I think this is pointing to the moon. No, I think this is. Actually, most people don't even have a clear idea what the moon is anyway. But nonetheless, there's just so much confusion, and our hatred comes out of that kind of limited understanding and confusion, ignorance. Ignorance is simply not knowing. In Sanskrit, avidya. Is like atheist, a cappella, agnostic. That just means without. And video is seeing, avidya. Just like the English word video, it comes from the same root all the way back to Sanskrit. So the breadth of the teachings, this is very useful because you can take one verse, just read one verse a day, and carry it around with you. And then it also is such a wonderful mirror as to our behavior through our body, speech, and mind. And, we compare how a bodhisattva would do things. Now, again, with bodhisattvas, Lama Tarchan told me, there's like a range of bodhisattvas, a scale of 1 to 100. You've got bodhisattvas in training, and then with a certain level of realization, there's a bodhisattva path. Kempo is often taught about the bhumis, the levels, but these are like deep realization. But it's wonderful because someone who's on the path is a bodhisattva. And in that book that I mentioned, this book again is The Crystallization of Shantideva's great work, Dalai Lama's favorite book. In that book, it says that someone who generates this great vow to liberate all sentient beings and then takes one step. Now, taking a step in this little book, it starts with the perfections, the path of the perfections. It starts in verse 25. So there are 6 perfections that are listed there. They're symbolized in the offering bowls too. People are going through the path of the perfections, leading to the perfection of wisdom. So what's the cause of that perfection of wisdom, attaining that? And it's called bodhicitta in Sanskrit. Bodhi means awakening, citta means mind. What's the awakening mind? The awakening mind is twofold. In the conventional sense, the awakening mind is the wish. You start training yourself, just repeating it, even though it doesn't have any grip on you at all, perhaps. But the wish that I'm going to regard all beings as having been my mother in a previous lifetime. You think of the kindness of a mother. I mean, it's just amazing. If this human realm is, as the Buddhas say, the most advantageous platform from which to transcend suffering and to thoroughly liberate sentient beings, if the human birth it has that, and it does. Why? Because it's a mixture because of the virtue we've done in the past and the negativity we've done in the past. We have this mix of virtue and the results of virtue and non-virtue. The result of virtue is that we have a thinking mind. We have the ability to train ourselves. The negative that we've done means that we have enough suffering in our life that we are aware of suffering or dissatisfaction. So we have the motivation. I mean, it's like, someone wins the lotto. They're not immediately thinking about, the suffering of life and what I have to do to get out of suffering. No, they're just riding on the good feelings. And so it's said in the sensual god realms, like the Greek gods, sort of, they've done so much virtue that they're just kind of living in the results of that virtue. And they forget that they need to be working on their minds, coming to liberation. So as human beings, we have that opportunity. We have just the best opportunity in this vast, vast universe. So interesting because, when you see this scale of suffering beings and then great liberation minds and all of that, human beings are kind of like in the middle. And the Buddha called his teaching the middle way between extremes. And I even saw scientifically, the size, our physical size is sort of like right in the middle between the vastness of all the known universes and the smallest particles that we know about. Here we are right in the middle. But at any rate, bodhicitta is the cause of our liberation. It's the cause of our Buddhahood. And so what is bodhicitta? Well, first is the aspiration. You think of all beings. They've all been my mother in the infinity of time. And even the worst mother, she carried me for 9 months and I survived. I mean, that's amazing, no matter what kind of problems she had. It's not to minimize any of the problems or praise her for, I don't know, having terrible addictions or abandoning the child or whatever, but still, that child is alive because of the mother's body for that time. So we have to have gratitude for all our mothers. So we have that aspiration. Natural thing of gratitude is you want to pay the person back somehow, to do good towards them. And so there you are. That's the aspiration bodhicitta, exceptionally positive. Now, the second part of conventional bodhicitta, there's aspiration, but then there's engaging or application. What does that mean? Aspiration bodhicitta is like, I want to go to Washington, D.C. You have to have that thought. It gives you immediately directionality, meaning in your life. I'm going somewhere with this. Instead of this endless going around in a circle, I'm going somewhere. The application bodhicitta, the engaging bodhicitta it's called, is taking one step towards Washington, D.C. And you can take a step, you can rest, you can run, you can walk backwards sometimes, you can do all sorts of stuff, but your intention is to go to Washington, D.C., and you're taking steps to do that. And Lama Tarchin said it's like, you're drowning in the middle of a lake, and someone throws you a rope from the shore, and you grab onto that rope. That rope is bodhicitta. He says you can pull yourself out of the lake. Some people want to do it very fast. Other people slow. Other people go fast, then slow, then rest. That's all right. He says you can do whatever you want. Just don't let go of the rope. The cause, the bodhicitta. The result of that conventional relative bodhicitta is absolute bodhicitta. This is the realization of our nature as it is, and abiding in that nature is the practice. Everything becomes centered there, and all the stuff that's happening around you are all like clouds covering the sun, but now you're resting in the light of the sun. You can be on a sun ray, you can be in the middle of the star. There are degrees of enlightenment, but it's exceptionally significant. So, in the Dalai Lama's favorite book, Shantideva says that generating that application bodhicitta, taking one step, unleashes clouds of blessings that fall on you even when you're asleep, and even when you're spouting off things in ignorance. And he gives the example of a prostitute in ancient India who thought it would be really funny for her clients to put on a nun's robes and prance around and pretend to be a nun. Shantideva said the merit, the positive influence of even her just pretending that way was so great that she was reborn in a heavenly realm. So the merit of this is truly inconceivable. In another place they said, someone who completely practices the self-liberation path comes to a place where you're just not suffering anymore. You don't have the potential to suffer anymore. And it's not completely true, but nonetheless, you're in a tremendous peaceful place. You can rest in that place, it's said, for an eon. And it's said at that level, you have the ability to walk through walls. That's the kind of mental understanding that you have, and the emptiness of phenomenon that is mind created. So someone with that level of understanding is said to have the light of a glowworm or a lightning bug. Now, compared to a Buddha, goes past self-liberation to full enlightenment and the liberation of all. That's said to be like the sun at India in the middle of the summer at high noon. So it's inconceivable to us, these things. But that's all right. We have a sense that, the Dharma will never let you down. You practice it and you see that, well, this is still better. I may have started out as tremendously arrogant, but even my parents notice that I have a little bit less arrogance than I used to have. Something's going in the right direction. So this little book is extremely valuable, and please take one, and you can use it in that way. The Dharma is exceptionally vast, and that can throw us off. If you're anything like me, I was just like completely, I didn't choose this. Wasn't sitting down and saying, this is what I want to do, and how do I apply, and all of that, and what the end result would be. There was no thinking like that at all. Rather, it comes unbidden to you. But it is a blessing. And you can even come to it or even do things thinking that you have a reason, an outward reason that you can put in the newspaper or tell your parents or girlfriend or whatever. But that isn't necessarily the reason. Those are just the surface kinds of things. There's something much deeper going on. And yet we're in this situation, in the Buddha's life and his awakening. It's the last moments before his awakening. He had these temptations, you can call it temptations, from Mara. Let's see if I can find some of this for you. Yeah, when he discovered the middle way, after years of certainly this life of leisure and just total materiality and meeting societal duty, everyone just praising him, this tremendous worldly accomplishment. Then he went on this path of asceticism and almost killed himself and realized that wasn't the way. And then at an extreme moment, he remembered an experience he had had as a young man at a plowing festival for his kingdom. He was the prince of the kingdom. And he saw all the men in this plowing contest, turning over the soil, killing the earthworms, birds coming in to feed on the insects and the injured bugs and worms. And he went off and sat under a rose apple tree and spontaneously, thinking about suffering and the universality of suffering, he came to a state called samadhi. Sama means even in Sanskrit, and di is the seed syllable of wisdom. So the Buddha Manjushri, for instance, when we visualize ourselves as Manjushri, it's a seed syllable in your heart is di. So samadhi, this completely undistracted state. And his father wondered at the festival, where's my son? Where did he go? And so he sent his servant to find him. And he found him and brought him back. Well, at this moment of crisis now, 30 years later, 20 years later, 25 years later, but who's counting? He remembered that mind state, that samadhi. And he said, this is it. This is the middle way. He had discovered the path to enlightenment, this undistracted mind. So he walked. It's it's a good distance. I think it's like 15 miles or so to this tree where he said the previous Buddhas had sat. And he discovered which direction to sit in, and faced with his back to the tree facing east, and resolved that he would come to enlightenment and he would not move from that seat until he had done so. And of course, what does this do? As soon as there is great commitment, when there's great virtue being practiced, great obstacles arise. We like to think it's like Hollywood, that everything is just sweetness and bliss. But no. So here he was. It was at that moment, when he made this vow that he wouldn't move until enlightenment, that Mara, the tempter, exclaimed, "The prince is desirous of passing beyond my control. I will never allow it." He then shouted his war cry to his army that extended in front of him for several miles. So like this army of, illusory figures. Mara mounted his great war elephant, causing several arms to appear on his body, each with a different weapon, and commanded the army to march forward. He overran all of the armies of the gods, including Indra's, the chief of all the gods. As Mara and his army marched forward, not a single deity was able to stand his ground, and the future Buddha was left sitting completely alone. So the obstacle was so great that it scared away, like all the positive deities. Mara, of course, was delighted with this overwhelming victory and said to his soldiers, "My friend, the prince, the son of Shuddhadana, is far greater than any other man. We shall never be able to fight him head on. We shall therefore attack him from behind." And Gautama, that's the Buddha, realizing he was now all alone, looked to the north, saw Mara and his army coming like a great flood. He said, "Here is this great army exerting its strength and power against me. My mother and father are not here, or any other relatives. I am all alone. But I have mastered the 10 perfections, which will serve as my shield and sword." Viewing the scene, Mara caused a whirlwind, thinking, "By this force I will drive Gautama away." In an instant, all the winds began to blow. Although these winds would have flattened mountains that were miles high, uprooted huge trees, and reduced villages and towns to rubble, when they reached the future Buddha, they lost all their power and were not able to cause so much as a fluttering on the edge of his robe. Then Mara caused a rainstorm, saying, "With this water I will overwhelm and drown him." Although the rain came down in torrents and had risen over the tops of the trees, this mighty inundation did not wet the robes of Gautama. He then caused a shower of rocks, in which immense mountain peaks flew smoking and flaming through the sky. But on reaching the future Buddha, they became celestial bouquets of flowers. Frustrated, Mara then caused showers of live coals, hot ashes, sand, and mud, but all fell at the feet of the Buddha to be. He then shouted at his army, "Attention! Why are you all just standing there? Seize him, drive this prince away." Mara, seated upon the shoulders of his mighty elephant, drew close to the future Buddha and said, "Gautama, arise from your seat. It does not belong to you, but to me." Future Buddha said, "Mara, you have not fulfilled the 10 perfections, nor have you devoted serious effort for knowledge, the welfare of the world, nor liberation. This seat does not belong to you, but to me." Unable to restrain his fury, the enraged Mara hurled his discus. The future Buddha continued to reflect on the perfections, and the discus changed into a canopy of flowers, and all of the weapons hurled by the army became wreaths of flowers and fell to the ground before him. Then the great Bodhisattva said to Mara, "Mara, who is a witness to your giving gifts?" And Mara replied, "All these, as many as you can see here, are my witnesses." And he stretched out his hand in the direction of his vast army that responded in a mighty roar of approval. Mara then said to the great Bodhisattva, "Gautama, who is witness to you having given gifts?" "Your witnesses," replied Gautama, "are living beings, and I have no living being present. However, not to mention all the gifts I gave in my past existences, let me mention the only great gifts I gave in my previous existence as Vasantara," that's the immediate life before, "which shall now be testified to by the solid earth, inanimate as she may be." Gautama then took out his right hand from beneath his robe and stretched it towards the mighty earth. And so you see the earth-touching gesture on the Buddha statue there. And said, "Are you witnesses or are you not to my having given a great gift in my last existence?" The mighty earth thundered back, "I bear you witness," in a roar as if to overwhelm the army of Mara. This great response caused Mara's extraordinary elephant to fall on its knees before the future Buddha, and followers of Mara fled in every direction, leaving their head ornaments, weapons, and cloaks behind them. Seeing all this, the multitude of gods cried out, "Mara is defeated. Prince Gautama has conquered. Let us go celebrate the victory." And as the great celebration began, the sun slowly settled behind the western horizon, and he started his meditation, which took one night, and he went through everything. And when Venus arose just before dawn, the light hit his eye, and that was the moment of his full awakening. He stayed for 7 weeks in the area around the tree. If you go to Bodh Gaya, they'll show you the different places where he sat. He spent 1 week gazing at the tree in gratitude. Can you imagine that sense of gratitude? It speaks to the power and the benefit of his realization. Aristotle said gratitude is the shortest lived human emotion. It's like in Hollywood, supposedly. "What have you done for me? Lately?" A week. And in several other weeks, there was once a great storm came up, and at any rate, there's all sorts of stories. But as he was in the jungle, the first people that he met were two merchants who came by, and they were somehow moved to give him some rice cakes and honey. And they took refuge in him, even though he hadn't even begun his teaching career. And he was doubting, maybe this is just too subtle. These teachings are too subtle. The truth is too subtle, and people will screw up anything. But it said that Brahma, highest of the gods, knew what the Buddha was thinking. He knew that the world would be lost and would perish if the perfected one inclined to inaction rather than teaching the doctrine. At that very moment, just as a strong man might extend or flex his arm, Brahma vanished from the Brahma heaven and appeared before the Buddha, and after a respectful salutation ended his speech by saying, "Venerable Sir, the world will perish if the awakened one does not decide to teach the doctrine." So he decided to teach. And he first thought that he would teach the two great teachers of ancient India that he had been with and had accomplished their level of understanding, but had not solved the problem of suffering, so he left them and went on. But he knew psychically that they had passed away. So then he thought about teaching the five ascetics who had rejected him when they saw him take nourishment when he discovered the middle way at that moment of crisis. So he started to walk off. He knew that they were in the deer park in a suburb of Varanasi. And this is maybe 100 miles. So he started to walk towards Varanasi. And he met someone on the way, a naked ascetic named Upaka, who stopped and spoke to him on the main road to Varanasi. And Upaka said, "Lord, you appear quite pure, very bright. Who has sent you on your mission? Who is your teacher? What is the teaching that you profess?" And the Buddha replied, "I am victorious over all, omniscient, undefiled, free from all craving, gaining liberation and wisdom by myself alone. Who then should I follow? For me there is no teacher. I have no equal in the world or among the gods. I alone am a fully enlightened one." On hearing this, Upaka, shaking his head in disbelief, said, "If you say so," and walked off. What I love about that is that this was a spiritual practitioner. The two merchants who showed up, they didn't have all these ideas of spirituality and I'm spiritually above other people and all this kind of baloney, all these concepts. They were just making a living, and they somehow responded just to the qualities of the Buddha and spontaneously made these offerings to help him, rice cakes and honey. We never heard from him again in the text. Meanwhile, the first spiritual practitioner he comes across says, "Okay, if you say so." It's so human. This is so true. This is why he hesitated to teach. There's just so much practical experience, 2,600 years. Things go up and down, and yet here we are. So all the teachings are just pointers at the moon. But yet we need them. We need teachings. We can't just sort of jump to the end because even that is egotistical. It's really something. We have to do this practice, this patient practice of great loving kindness and compassion. But yet there's the understanding, the teachings are there, which are really helpful. And you start to see how terribly radical the Buddha was in his own age and still is today. Because if you think of it, for instance, I've been talking lately about this one body of teaching that's called the Yoga Chara. Chara means the path, practice, and yoga, of course, is unity. So the path of unity, unifying all these different aspects of ourselves. How do we do that? And it talks about 6 consciousnesses. It talks about 8 consciousnesses totally. But it gives you an idea of how things work and how we make mistakes. So there's 6 consciousnesses. The 5 are the ones that psychology recognizes: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, touch. But the 6th one is mind, the thinking mind. The Buddhists regard this as the thinking mind as an organ. And it's said that when the organ comes in contact, it's like a lock and a key. When the organ comes in contact with an object of that sense, that consciousness arises. So our eye consciousness, our eye comes in contact with forms or colors or shapes, and visual consciousness is there. So what's important about this is that rather than consciousness, as everybody else in the world, religious or non-religious, believes consciousness is some sort of, thing out there existing unto itself, for the Buddhists, consciousness is created, but not in the materialistic way, that our body is creating our mind. Buddhism reverses that. The mind is creating our body. This is like shocking. And how do we see this? Well, eye consciousness comes from the contact. Mental consciousness, when our thinking mind focuses on an object, our mind consciousness is there. Now, this is arising from moment to moment to moment. That's what we don't see. The continuity of this happening, instead of consciousness being this all-embracing thing, it's being created moment by moment by moment. Like a movie. These days we don't have movies anymore with the internet, but you had individual frames, but they were moving very fast and looked like there was a continuity going on, but it was just individual frames. We are actually dying and being reborn moment to moment to moment. But because there's this seeming continuity, we project some sort of permanence to that. So what happens when there's an arising, whether through eye consciousness, sound, thinking, there's a reaction. There's like baggage. Now that is transformed, transmitted, transferred, it said, through this seventh consciousness, which is basically the ego. It's called manas, jnana in Sanskrit. Jnana is knowing, is knowing by the differences, and manas is mind. So this ego that we think that's the unifying principle. And in a way it is, but not ultimately. But it transmits those immediate reactions that we're having right now. So to what's called the store consciousness, alaya vijnana. Again, vijnana is consciousness, alaya is the storehouse. Like the Himalayas, him is snow, alaya is the storehouse, the store of the snows, Himalayas. So the store, all our unconscious stuff is stored up there. So for instance, I have an experience right now with my thinking mind. I have a thought that is painful to me. Somebody else, won the lotto and I didn't win it, and I have this, based on my ego, have this reaction. That immediately gets stored up there. Every single moment that we're doing, body, speech, and mind, is stored up there, good and bad and neutral. What happens is, as these arisings from moment to moment to moment, the next time the conditions are right, it like triggers, and those samskaras, those baggage, come through the ego, transmitted right down into your thinking mind again. This is karma. So all of this is happening. Buddha was able to show a mechanism by which we can understand and therefore have confidence that when we're doing virtuous things, we're going to get a virtuous result. Once you have confidence and start doing that, you start to see the results in your life. And of course, that only builds. The Dharma will never let you down. So this is all extremely valuable, but if you're like me, this is like extremely esoteric, and there's no basis for it except in very, very kind of indirect ways in our own traditions. We have our own traditions of excellent virtue, and that this is a good thing to do. This kind of religious sensibility of what holds a culture together. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds with this at all, but just to point out that all of these methods, have been practiced and realized and passed on for 2,600 years. Someone said of the Dalai Lama, well, you said Dalai Lama, that there are, these 5 great negative mind states. What if science discovered a 6th? He said, well, we'd have to change the Buddhist teachings and add to the 6th. Because it's not about our teachings and you can't change them. It's about what works, what leads the mind to realization of the mind. Okay, I went over, forgive me. I just love that story, though, about Upaka saying, if you believe it, okay. You say so. That's how it goes. That's right. That's right. It's true. It's really true. Yeah. One more story. Sorry. So the Buddha was invited by a king, by a local king, to give to his kingdom, and he was going to give this big ceremony, which builds tremendous merit. Where people, we do this here, a soak offering, kind of chakra in Sanskrit, where you transform food and drink to wisdom and merit, and then partake in it, and then it purifies karma. So in the old days, only the kings can do it. You had to have a certain amount of cowrie shells, which were like their dollars. The Tibetans democratized it when it Tibet, you didn't have to have as much money to do it, and ordinary people could do it through visualization. But nonetheless, king gives this huge ceremony for producing merit, right? And then they're having the dinner at the end, and the king, with obviously a little pride, says to the Buddha, "Now, who gained the most merit from today?" And the Buddha said, "Well, actually, when I was coming into town, there was this old widow on the edge of the crowd, and she didn't have any money. She couldn't make any contribution. She picked up a handful of dust and visualized it to be gold dust, and she threw it at me. She gained the most merit today." On the outer, if we're always living in the outer, we don't really see the truth. When we see the truth, then the outer has meaning too. Okay, that's enough. Let's take our break, and then we'll do some green tar this morning when we're done. Yeah.
Just a connection. So does that point to the idea of intention? It was her intention was pure.
Right. Her intention and her faith, basically. The Buddha is just the outer manifestation of her inner Buddha. And so she suddenly, and her intention was she's going to benefit all by making this offering, and she wanted to be the greatest offering of all. So what could she do?